Welcome back, everybody. And again, this is Breaking Generational Curses. This is part 2 of Showing Up Black on Purpose. Okay, and to pick back up what we talked about last week, we are going to discuss code switching and what that means. Okay, so the question I have is, what is code switching? To you guys.
Definition: code switching.
The definition of code switching: to customize style of speech to the audience or group being addressed. And if you would like to get a bit, just an additive to that, it does involve a changing from one way of speaking to another between and within interactions, your dialect, your language, and your nonverbal communication.
Nonverbal.
I know that nonverbal kind of that's saying something.
Okay.
So Tina, what does that definition kind of feel like for you? What does that look like for your world, or feel like you've heard it?
Well, I can definitely have some experiences from being in corporate and being in pediatrics. And while that was a very dominating place for women, um, as I climbed up the ladder and became a manager, those spaces looked a lot different. So, one thing I can say is I always was authentically myself, but I definitely, especially when you're in the corporate arena like that, there are certain words and different things, especially in the hospital culture, that you have to use to kind of stay within that box. So I definitely can remember using certain words, especially during interviews and things of that nature. But I'm always going to be myself. So I probably definitely code switched a little bit to adhere to the culture, but still stay true to who I was. So yeah, for sure, it happens.
For me, I think code switching, it showed up in so many ways. I think, like you said, I worked in like a woman dominated field. And so sometimes you could have, a little vibe with people. And even when you had other people of color, I think that there still was a code switching even within that. Because again, as we talked about, like Black people aren't always on the same spectrum. But even certain people that you come into contact with who are maybe other Black women, the way that they respond to other Black women might be a little bit different. So there might even be a code switching in that, because is there a trustworthy relationship that I can still show up and be my full authentic self even in that relationship of another person that might look like me? And so I think the code switching gets so nuanced beyond like, oh, am I talking in front of a non-person of color or a non-Black person or a non-woman? It really shows up like, am I talking in front of somebody safe, and can I say those things? So I think that code switching goes back to safety a lot of times. Can I be myself fully in whatever space I'm showing up in? So that's what I think.
Wow, you took it there when you said safety.
Yeah.
Think about it like that.
Yeah.
As far as in the professional world, because I worked in the prison and jail, and it ain't no code switching over there. But when I first heard it, or when I first was made aware of it, I felt like I was equating code switching to like not being who I was, or kind of making myself smaller to accommodate other people. And I was like, I'm not about to do that. But then I started to think about it, but I code switching, make it a benefit for myself, to keep the door open and open for someone behind me in this work workspace as well. So I guess I took it from a negative, came to code switching. Like I didn't. Now that I'm more aware of who I am, I may seem a bit more aggressive to them, or to others. Like I still know the lingo, or I know how to carry myself, if that makes sense. Like, it's like I'm me, and you're gonna respect me, and I'm gonna respect you. We're not gonna cross any kind of lines. But when I didn't know what it meant, and when I thought I had to really kind of make myself smaller, I didn't have a voice. I didn't give myself a voice or the opportunity to have a voice. I allowed them to kind of talk over me and let them lead me.
That's a good point.
It is.
Yeah, I know for me, I've definitely had my share of code switching, especially like in the different industries that I have worked in. Like At some point, I was a flight attendant. Other points, I was a Waffle House waitress. Those languages look a lot different between. So the switch was real. But this also brings to mind too, and 2 points. Like, historically, where during, like, especially like during slavery, Jim Crow, where you did that switch. It just was a natural part of life, especially, say if you were a house slave versus a field-born type situation. So like adjusting it to, I guess, fit in or be accepted is a big part of it. But it also just made me think of, okay, so on Netflix, the show Big Mouth, that's about like kids going through puberty. So in the last season that they had, the only black character, the black female character, one of the main characters on the show, her mom was white and her dad was black, but they didn't teach her about the black side of her family and of her being. And so it wasn't until she went to visit her father's side of the family where she was around like black people, and that's when she like changed her hairstyle to, I think she had cornrows or something. They were, talked about the way she talked and everything. And so in it, the other black character had taught her about code switching. And he had a switch on his arm, and he would show her like in different interactions with people at school. And then like, I think they were going to go to a party, and he was saying like, that's he was liked by everybody, is because he knew how to control his switch.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so like, yeah, it was very interesting. So, but I appreciated them for bringing that to the table, because that's reality. Like, especially if you're a person who's, a BIPOC, Black or Indigenous person of color.
Yeah.
The code switches is real. As much as we don't like to do it, or even it's so kind of ingrained that you often don't even know you're doing it unless you just really sit in reflection of the different spaces that you're in and how you are showing up. And because often, we often don't show up, well, not everyone, but showing up on purpose, you are aware of these things. But when you're just showing up because, you have to, or things like that, you're just living life. That switch is real.
Cassandra, what you made me think about is the idea of even code switching in every different space. Because if I might be talking to, I know like even recently I was talking to like somebody who was a PhD, and they were a Black PhD, but the code switch even to talk to them was a little different, because it's not like I came in and was like, oh, we're Black, I can talk to you on that level. How she showed up made me go, oh, I need to be code switching at a different level. And so the code switching wasn't maybe like between a racial divide. It was just like a, I'm not gonna call it a class divide, but it was almost the way that the situation felt like. It was definitely in that vibe. And so it was just like, oh, let me code switch to be able to be heard in that space, or even try to make it space. So that made me even think about, just because I was very aware of like, oh, let me be aware of how I'm, responding in the way that they're wanting to hear this information, because I can get the information across regardless anyway, but let me put it in this very tailored way, because I know that this isn't a safe space for me to show up with my sister girl vibe and get, the message across. So sometimes the code switching, I'm getting my point across, but I'm having to get it across so that they can understand me. And I think that's kind of like what Cassandra's talking about. We had to do it in those other spaces in the way. And I think that's the same way we show up around it now. Like there's some safety in being like, I know what this expected outcome is. How can I navigate this the best way I can?
Wow. That's pretty deep. I never thought about it like that, about the safety part, but just the two examples that you've given so far, I mean, it sounds like you had the opportunity to still be yourself, but that you quickly noticed that there was this difference. It wasn't the community, the vibe. It wasn't that vibe. And you instantly felt like, oh, I need to switch it up. Did that? How did that make you feel? I know that's probably a counselor question.
Um, for me, it just kind of tapped into my awareness. Like,
Okay.
there's an expected outcome in this type of situation. I don't feel unsafe in it, but there is an
Okay.
expected outcome, and I know that I need to move in a certain way. I need to talk to them in a way that they want to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
And to get what I need out of this situation. And so it's just like, I know that they want me to sound a certain way. I know that they want me to use a certain language. And because all of that language is within me and that is real to
Of
me, I just
course.
needed to
Yeah.
tailor it to the way that they needed to hear. And so, although it was just like, oh, it'd be easier to be more casual, I know that certain situations calls for not to be as casual.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you have to do that. Is it a space that I always want to be in where I feel like I have to put on that way? No. So it's
No.
just, again, like being mindful of what type of space I want to be in and what's the effort and the
Mhm.
labor that I have to put in to be in that space.
Ooh, that word labor.
Shanika, I feel like you were about to say something.
I know. I think y'all covered it. I was just gonna ask. It's kind of like, I guess, aside from the lady being a African American female, I want to ask, can someone code switch and embrace their blackness at the same time, or show up black on purpose at the same time? And they do that.
I think that, people do the corporate snapback all the time. So I feel like, yes, because I think we have to show, I think,
Yeah.
depending, again, blackness always shows up in a different way, right?
It does.
So sometimes you have to code switch and snap back, or, code switch and show up and code switch and be that, because we can still be talking about some really black subjects and some real critical things and still come off in a way that it can be expressed for everybody to understand. And I know, Cassandra, I'm going to tap you in because I know that you show up in spaces where you're having to be black and you're showing up and you're talking about some subjects. So what do you feel like you've had to do to code switch and navigate between different communities and doing like some, work about some critical things?
I would say the only thing I've had to do is focus on my words. I show this is as I'm here now with you all. This
Exactly.
is how I show up when I'm in those other spaces. But when we're having these like difficult conversations, I show up as my whole self, and because I want them, whoever I'm talking to, understand the perspective I'm coming from, the experiences that I'm sharing around the difficult racial and social justice conversations that we're having. And so in those spaces, to be your authentic self is the best you can do to help people understand and make the connections about the information you're presenting, essentially. So in those spaces, I'm just Cassandra, like y'all see on these YouTubes, but I may not say the word y'all as frequently, and I may not cuss. Unless it's like maybe a damn might slip out for help, but I won't drop any like F-bombs and just go on the full on rant or anything. I speak in a way that is deliberate and slow so that I can make sure that like I can't be in charge of other people's understanding. So let's start there. But I can, but I can work on how I present it to you. And so I'll just be like, I say, if anything changes, I would say I become more deliberate and slow in my speech. So that way, they can flow in.
I like that slow down speech and flow. I can even recall some times where I felt code switching between upper management versus staff. And you're right. I could tend. I'm always myself, but I could definitely see where I could be a little bit more laid back. But when I was in those leadership meetings, again, it's the language. It's it's keeping up with that culture of so that you can be heard. So I can remember some of that too. But again, I think we have to own who we are, be who we are, no matter what. And as long as you have that foundation within yourself, you'll be able to be in these different spaces and be okay. I think today for me, it's that safety thing that's coming up for me to think about. Like I never thought about it like that. Because if you're not safe, if you don't feel safe, you're not gonna express yourself. So
Right. And I think too, the a part of the code switching kind of thing is those stigmas and perceptions. So like for example, if you have someone who is like really, really Southern, like real thick Southern accent, well, if you go back a few years, it was perceived that that was a sign of like low intelligence or something. Of the words that people use. And so like, or even if someone with a foreign accent and you talk to them, people make assumptions and stuff like that. So even on that side of the spectrum, the code switching is real. So you do have some people who have foreign accents that they try to speak more clear or better English or whatever in the spaces that they're in too. So I think there's so many different levels to code switching. And that's, something to explore, especially when you're showing up in the different spaces, or even you can just notice how other people show up in spaces.
I'm so glad you said that. Yeah, I was just, as you were talking, my mind was turning because I remember being in a meeting with the family, Hispanic, and we had an interpreter speaking for us. And anytime you have a secondary person speaking for both parties, trying to translate between English and Spanish, it's a barrier. But when you guys started talking about body language, at first I was like, I didn't get it, but you took me back to that because I was watching the parents' body language and she clearly was not understanding what we were saying in English because the interpreter, the words that some of my staff was using was too big. And she would just kind of go in a little bit. And, a lot of the cultures would just kind of go, yes, just to say yes, to look like they're understanding. And you're right. I felt like the parent was trying to, like you say, code switch and act, but you could clearly see that the body language was there and she was totally not understanding what we were saying. So I think that's true in different cultures too. Yeah.
Shanika, were you about to jump in again?
No,
okay.
No, I guess I was gonna say, like, in other words, it's just safe to say, just pay the pretty much while in the workplace. Just
And even outside of the workplace, I think that we code switch too. I think like if we were at, I don't know, we was at Whole Foods in Sandy Springs, we might act a little different if we was at the Kroger on Memorial Drive. You know what I mean? Because it might be just literally a physical safety. And it's like, okay, I might be more surrounded by people that look like me. So there might be a perception of I'm safe here. Whereas like I might be somewhere in Sandy Springs. I don't even know if Sandy Springs has a Whole Foods. So like no shade on that, right? just throw that out there. Like I have no idea if they have one. But like you might be there and there might be full of people who don't look like you, even if it's other people of color. Maybe it's not other Black women there that looks like you. And so when you're interacting with people where you might, how like you said, sometimes you might want to pop off, but you're like, okay, well, what does it look like if I pop off in Sandy Springs? Are they going to understand my anger, or are they going to perceive it as a threat fully? And so I think that code switching is so nuanced that it can show up in this space. It might show up even when we're walking down the street and a male shows up in front of us and they're trying to have conversation where we might want to be like, if this mother doesn't get away from me, and we have to code switch and be like, oh, haha, because there's still access to physical safety. Like, if I flip out and really give him the energy I'm really feeling because he's like approached me in the street, am I physically safe? Is he going to do something weird? And so I think that code switching just shows up like you said, am I playing the game? Am I keeping myself safe? And how far is the game getting played? Like, is it coming into like my own health and safety to like play the game too? So it makes me think about something from our last video. Cassandra, I think, said just talking about choosing to show up a certain way and choosing to show up a certain way in the community that you're
serving. I definitely have a space now that I'm in that looks very different from corporate. So and what's beautiful about it is there's all people of all walks of life that are in my tribe. So I'm definitely, I'm not going to say sensitive, but I'm aware that there's different people with different beliefs, but that doesn't deter me from being who I am. I mean, I was just on a live the other day and I just dropped off a few cuss words because I just felt like that they needed to understand that, when it comes to boundaries and things of that nature, you have to protect yourself. And sometimes, you have to be stern in that. So I did give them a little warning because a lot of times, they think, oh, Tina's going to just, she's going to be nice. And I was like, look, no, today, this is what we're doing. But I got so much feedback from people coming in going, thank you for being so transparent because we need that. Like, we know you got a sweetheart, but it's good to also know you don't play any games when it comes to your self-care. So I feel like it doesn't bother me by having different people in my tribe. I'm going to be who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, you can be in this space or you don't have to be. But like no apologies to it, because there's too many spaces out here right now for people to be trying to pick and pry. If you don't want to be in the space, don't. If you don't like the person's post, scroll, keep going, So I'm gonna be me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
I work in a community that's majority African Americans in my workplace as far as who I serve in the community. And I have a way of how I talk with them, not at them or to them. I have a way how I talk with them and to help them understand, how to stay on the right track. However, there's who are not of like who is non-black or whatever, and they have some training on how to speak to people. And in my mind, I'm like, you don't know how to speak to us. We know how to speak to us at a level where we will understand. So although I took the training or whatever, and we have to execute the questions on the little script or whatever, we tell them what is on the little things we learned in training. However, I still put my little meat on it to let them know, hey, for real though, this is what you ain't gonna do is I don't disrespect nobody, don't get me wrong. Let's give it back, give it to me. But honestly, they're not it's not registering them because now like it looks as if I'm trying to be uppity when I'm really not. And I'm trying to be like, hey, look, listen for real. You ain't trying to go back. You're not trying to go back, so let's not do that. Versus what are the consequences of your action? No, what you're not gonna do is just because it's like I'm playing with them if I come because they know that's not me. I don't talk like that.
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna start with I'm gonna say, hey, but for real, you're gonna lose your job, you keep going, So I had to learn how to kind of code switch, but kind of still fit me in so I can really help them really gain what if they continue down a path of destruction, pretty much.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I like that, Shanika, because it's still a level of code switching, but it's code switching back into your native tongue. You know what I mean? Because when you're working with people who in the community where we know like they talk like us, they've had similar experiences, and that if we use a certain language, they're gonna get it. And so it's easier to go ahead and drop like that. Like even in therapy, like Tina said, people expect Carissa to come in all nice, and I let people know like, okay, I am that, but also let's know we about to get this work. Like we're also going to be doing these things, and so there's going to be some direct conversation. There's going to be some accountability, and so there is. I might drop a couple of little F-bombs in the middle of a session or something like that because I know that you understand that. I know that you understand it. I know that makes sense in your world. So let's get rid of it. Let's be honest and call a thing a thing.
I mean, you just made me think about code switching with even as a parent, and especially taking care of other people's kids. I have to be very mindful of what I say because at my house it's pretty wide open. We have wide open conversations. We can talk about anything. My kids know that, but I know other kids don't necessarily have that space. And You know, I may have to switch my words up when I'm speaking to other people's kids. But what you're not gonna do is be disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
So if you come in Auntie Tina's space and you're trying to be disrespectful, I may have to say a little different word or two, but I'm still gonna let you know we're not doing that. Now, if you're my child, it's gonna be, excuse me, hello. You know, I'm just gonna go ahead on. But yeah, I do. You made me think about that. It's even in parenting,
Yeah. I think
watching
that
kids.
that nuance definitely shows up in the code switching. So it's showing up in your blackness. It could be showing up in your womanness. It be showing up in your mama, your auntie hood. Even as a coworker, like even like you said, Shanika, you're working as a coworker. You sometimes you got to get with your coworker and be like, bruh, like I know that you used to folks coming to you and we being all eloquent and shit, but like let me have a real conversation with you and know that
Hello.
you are not about to be employed no more. This is not about to happen.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Crazy.
agree.
I know you know I'm saying historically, so I guess we're taking each other's role today. Now, that's,
I love it.
so I don't know if y'all had the type of childhood I had, but back in the day, around my friends, that's like a sailor. Like I ain't got no kind of home training. But it's crazy how they just switch in front of your parents. Like not even. Like I don't say none of that around my grandma. So it's like close to like you don't even know it. Like I'm cussing all the time, and all of a sudden I get home, I know how to turn it off. Like it's crazy.
Yeah, I agree.
No.
I think that it's so I think the code switching thing is an interesting conversation because I think like so many of the things that we've talked about, it comes from something historical and then it morphs into something else. And then as we get more knowledge, we notice it in other spaces. So I'm sure there is even probably a code switching in the way that we speak on these videos, right? Because if we really talked about some of the ways that we talk about stuff, they probably be like, them folks is wilding. So
Right?
they better be glad we edit ourselves for this. Like, you know, like there's
Yeah,
still even
preaching today. No,
right.
I even just thought about, I'm gonna go ahead on and say it. I'm just gonna put it out there. I feel like depending on who I'm talking to, especially if it's a
Okay.
guy, there may be some code switching involved. I mean, I'm a very deep thinker. I have all the words, all the things, but if I know that you're not gonna be able to understand what I'm saying, I'm probably gonna dial it back a little bit. I'm just,
Yeah, I
no,
agree.
instead of me, I mean, to you guys, I may say emotional intelligence. To somebody else, I might say, I need you to understand your feelings, your emotions, So it's still, I'm saying the same thing, but just using different words. But I've noticed that too. But it's kind of hard for me to code switch, I guess, when I think about talking to a guy. It's like, it is what it is.
Yeah.
You have some emotional intelligence. I don't know how else to really pair that and say it different, but you just made me think about that.
Mm-hmm.
The more we talk, the more I keep coming up with different ways about switching.
Yeah. So it just again thinks about just showing up. It just reminds you to just show up as you regardless, like
That's it.
in your blackness, in your whatever, it's just showing up in you and just
Hmm.
be it. And then like you said, like you're either playing the game because sometimes that you gotta show, you got to talk a certain way to make a certain thing happen. Like we get all of those things, and then sometimes we just know that we gotta show up to be safe. It's so
Me
many
too.
nuances in on those things. So I think that is interesting to think about in and of itself. So this makes me think about some of the conversation again that we had in the part one is thinking about noticing where you're showing up. And it really makes me think about how much effort and labor, because like we just named a couple situations where it was either at workplace, it could have been a romantic relationship, working with children, just wherever where it's a nuance where we're code switching and showing up. And so it makes me think about again where we talked about showing up in places where we accepted, and what does that really look like to show up in places and be truly accepted and go where we're accepted? Like, are we gonna, how much labor are we willing to put in? Like how much, like if I have to work in corporate and I got a code switch to the I mean like always code switch to the like, so in like, how like sometimes you got to talk to that person and you put on that voice and it's exhausting because you're thinking about it and overthinking about like, oh, how do I nuance this to be and make this safely through this conversation, to give them, you know, like how much labor is it into it? So what do y'all think about that? Is it something that y'all, I know everybody's shaking their head no already, but even in the small ways, like we worked in corporate places, we put on a voice, but sometimes like, what if we didn't have like to be able to close the door and turn it off? So how much labor do you feel like people are putting in, you have putting in? What does that feel like for y'all?
I know just for me, just thinking about the past and some of the spaces that I did hardcore duty in, that was a lot.
Yeah.
And like, and in my mind, I can't even say it happened long ago, but in my mind, I keep having like flashbacks to like community mental health spaces. And that was a lot. That was exhausting. Yeah. It was very exhausting. So I think I am, with age and wisdom and experience, I've got to a point now to be comfortable in myself. And I think that's a big part of it, is being comfortable and then knowing and understanding your own boundaries and your limitations. Like there's some ways that I just refuse to be in certain spaces, in a lot of spaces really. And I always like to focus on my showing up authentically me. And in spaces where I can't, that's where there's a problem. And so when there's that problem, that's a whole different ball game, can of worms.
That's it.
Cassandra, I'm gonna have to go and jump on that. So
please jump, because I'm over here just like
so like Cassandra, what you said right there is that I don't need to be in spaces that I can't show up as me. And I think something recent happened, like most of y'all know it's on the call, but anyway, like something recently happened that made me think about the space that I was going to show up in. Like it seems like it's going to be a lot of labor to be there, emotional labor, as far as just like having to prove yourself, having to be in a space. And I'm like, is that truly a space that I want to be in? Because the amount of labor, the code switching, the amount of effort that I'm going to have to do, it seems like it's overwhelming, and it doesn't actually match the outcome that I want to do. Because if I show up in my community and I'm getting to be myself, the work feels easier. The work is, the work is still hard. Like the work is still the work. And then the labor is still those things, but it's like, is it like am I really forcing labor? Do I have to really work this hard to get this outcome? Because maybe that's not the community. Maybe I can still do this same work, but I don't have to do it in that community. So it just really made me think about that. Like, let me show up as me authentically in my Blackness and whatever it is that, is standing out to them, and let me do it. And do I have to do it in that space? Although that might be a lovely opportunity, but is it the one that's going to be what I really need? Is it going to be the most authentic space that I'm able to move in? And so kind of thinking about that. So I like that.
So my affirmation is that I am creating spaces that I'm supposed to be in. They will attract me. And the reason I say that is because people will come after you. Oh, you're great. I want you to speak here. I want you to do this. I want you to do that. And what I had to learn is that just because someone invited me into their space, that doesn't mean I'm supposed to be in that space. So I'm okay now with saying no, thank you. I'm good, because that's not the space for me.
I like that, Tina.
Yeah. Let's write that down.
It makes it easier, and it goes back to what Carissa said about the ease and flow of it. If I've got to struggle with coming into your space and I'm already on edge and I don't know how this is gonna work out, I don't need to be over there.
I love that, Tina.
I don't need to do it.
I'm just gonna
start turning down people. No, thank you. Sorry.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a different space to move in, because a lot of times when we're historically have been so pressed about being at somebody's table, we show up to the table and it's not actually them wanting to, be helpful, not wanting to actually hear our voices. It's just something for show. And so that's something else to, like, while it is a nice novelty that some of us have been able to make it to the table, I'm happy some of us have made it to the table and realized that we don't care about that table. Like, that's not the table I'm supposed to be sitting at. I'm actually supposed to be over there creating this table, and I'm supposed to be doing these bigger things, and this table right here is a sham, and we can kick this thing over. So I think that
that's right.
went a little too far. But
No,
it just
keep
kind of
going.
makes you just really, really think about like, am I showing up in these places? How am I showing up? And even if I have shown up and I'm here and they let me in, do I have to stay? Do I want to be in this space? You know, do I have to be there? So I like it all. I love it all.
Yeah.
That's it.
Any thoughts, Shanika?
Okay.
Yeah.
So growing up, I had with being accepted, and I also had abandonment issues. So I was always wanted to be accepted no matter what. I was okay with being tolerated in certain groups. That was just that was where my thing was growing up and in my adulthood. However, now that I am aware of who I am, what I bring, what I can do, I no longer waste energy on stuff like that. So if I don't feel like I'm gonna, if I feel like it's genuine where I am, I don't mind moving away. I don't mind taking a step back. I don't mind cutting people off or cutting, you know what I'm saying, going away from things because it's draining trying to be who won't accept you. They're content on not, you know, taking you seriously, and I'm not going to continue to waste my energy on that. Labor is very mental with me when it comes to, you know, being accepted where they want to accept me.
Kind of been my takeaway from it is really noticing where you're showing up in space as you're being your authentic self, and if you're allowed to be it, because like we all said, like Shanika just said, like it's exhausting to be in a space that doesn't want you, that doesn't accept you, doesn't agree with whatever it is about you. So I think my takeaway from today in the you know, showing up in Blackness is just truly showing up in spaces that accept you in your Blackness, in your whatever it is, whatever your intersection is that you need to be supported in that space. So I think that that is an amazing takeaway from me. It's just like, it's just a reminder, like I don't have to show up in spaces. If I'm not accepted in that space, it's okay. I don't have to be in that space. I don't want to be in that space because I want to be in spaces that I can show up as myself.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Anybody else have any takeaways for the day?
I also, for one last thing, sorry, Cassandra, you're going to speak? I'm sorry.
Okay, girl, no, go.
I also want those who's not really familiar with code stitching, I want them to know that it doesn't mean that you lack confidence, that you lack self-awareness.
Right.
It just shows that, you know, I say playing the game, you're ever going to make yourself smaller when you're playing the game.
Definitely.
I like that.
Yeah, I would say for my takeaways, involve just that reminder of being intentional. Even though code switching sucks, that you do have to make, you know, these moves and these adjustments and be this way instead of just kind of being just you're ultimately yourself. But you know, that's the reality of, you know, our experiences here in being humans on this planet. But there's a way to use that to your benefit though, and knowing how, and like, you know, like y'all said, the game, knowing how is a way to navigate those waters in different areas, in different like industries and fields, like y'all mentioned corporate and like Waffle House, like all these different arenas, even, you know, positions within the same organization and things like that or whatever. It's a way to use it to your benefit, to where it can be a tool and not necessarily a burden. But at the same time, you have to be mindful of what's best for you, your own boundaries, and being intentional in choosing how you want to show up in those spaces.
Yeah.
Great.
I agree.
Tina, any thoughts or takeaways for you from today?
I think one of the biggest things that sticks out to me is that it's just important for you to know who you are first. So that when you do have to go into these different environments, you won't be attaching yourself to somebody else's identity. because that can be really scary. But if you can own who you are first, and then, like Cassandra said, take these tools with you and go into these spaces, my hope is that it'll still be healthy for you because you're being yourself and you're just maneuvering and navigating, like she said, to get the best outcome that you need at that moment, and still be who you are.
Yeah, I
Code
like
switch, but
that.
don't compromise yourself.
Say that
Right.
again, Cassandra.
Code switch, but do not compromise
I like
Okay.
this. I
yourself.
like this takeaway from code switching
Not
today, y'all. I think it's a different. I think it's definitely a different perspective because we definitely think about code switching always with something negative and
Yeah.
something that we really don't like. Oh, look at you, got a code switch, but sometimes you can like it is a tool that we can use to benefit us. So I like that. I really like that perspective a lot.
Yes, in our community.
That part, because anyway, we're not about to soapbox it because we ended. But I think that's key. You know, we have to use these tools to be able to go back and assist our community because everybody can't show up in this space and code switch at the level that we can or do those things. So I think that is why it's beneficial for us to be able to show up in these spaces and be real because we do want to come back and help our community. So the code switching is between both worlds, between the corporate or the whatever and the academic world, and then being able to show up in your community. So I think that code switch is still a nuance because we can show up in both spaces. We can be out here with everybody and do the thing, and then still show up in other spaces and get bigger things done as well. So I think that's awesome. I just really like this takeaway from code switching today.
I do too. I learned a lot. Thank you, ladies.
Yeah. So Shanika, take us away.
Well, you guys, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and always remember that help is on the way.
Even if Zoom don't cooperate.
Okay.
Boom. That part.